Hear the word of the Lord from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, beginning with verse 31. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Every Wednesday, we have a meeting at hospice. Officially, it's called our interdisciplinary group. Unofficially, it's called care team. Each week, we discuss half of our patient caseload, person by person, addressing changes in their bodies, minds, and spirits, and discussing emergent needs for solutions. Recently, we had a particularly poignant case. Fred, who lives alone with the exception of a fully grown grandson who lives in Fred's basement. Fred wants to die in his home. His daughter works at a local high-end Spartan store. But as you can imagine, she just barely makes enough to keep her own house and home together. Daughter can't take time off of work to care for Fred, or she will lose her own home. But she goes to her father every morning before work and every evening after work to care for him as best she can. Grandson does nothing to help Fred. He stays in his place in the basement. Fred has been growing weaker and weaker in the last couple of weeks. He's been trying to take himself to the bathroom, trying to get himself food and drink, trying to do all the things that he's been used to doing for himself his whole life long. Unfortunately, every time he gets up to do something for himself, he falls. Hospice saw to it that he received one of those life alert alarms so that when he falls, hospice is notified immediately. The safety feature has led to a dozen or more phone calls to the local fire department every day. Luckily for Fred, the fire station is conveniently located across the street from his home. Fred's nurse, Cherry, is beside herself to know what to do. Wednesday, she was so upset, she began crying during our meeting. You see, Cherry knows that Fred wants to die at home. His home. Our social worker obtained some Medicaid help for him 2 hours a day, each and every morning, but that still leaves 22 hours of almost completely unsupervised care for Fred, and continuing multiple falls with multiple trips from the fire department to get him up again and again and again. Cherry feels that Fred shouldn't remain in his home without 24/7 care, which Fred can't afford. The only way he can have 24/7 care is to go to a nursing home. And that is something Fred does not want at all or ever. So Cherry weeps. She's leaving on vacation the very next day. She's upset that she can't resolve the situation before she goes. She feels she's failing Fred. She's doing the best, the most that she can possibly do, given the entirety of Fred's circumstances. But she wants to keep him safe, which means placing him in a nursing home in direct conflict with what Fred wants for his end-of-life care. Juxtapose this story with our Jesus story, which also involves grief and sadness. Jesus has been teaching his way around the countryside, slowly making his way toward Jerusalem, where he knows the end will come. Someone asks him a question about who will be saved in the end, to which Jesus replies, among other things, these words: "Indeed, some are last who will be first, and some are first who will be last." Then we enter our portion of the story, which we just read a few moments ago, where some Pharisees arrive on the scene, warning Jesus off from heading to his final destination of Jerusalem, because Herod, the kind of Jewish leader the Romans have propped up over that very city, wants to kill Jesus. The first words out of Jesus' mouth after receiving the Pharisees' warning are, "Go and tell that fox for me." Jesus' words are angry, not gentle. Name-calling, not kindness. Truth-telling, not acquiescence. He tells the scoundrel Pharisees that he has work yet to do. He will continue healing and teaching and making his way toward Jerusalem for the ending of his life, because all prophets die in Jerusalem. He identifies himself as a prophet, fighting for God's justice and mercy. He agrees that he knows he will be killed in Jerusalem as a prophet of God. He adamantly testifies that he has more work to do before that day, and no one is going to get in his way until the proper time arrives. Fox is not a nice thing to call Herod the Tetrarch. Tetrarch meaning that Herod rules only a fourth of what was considered his father's kingdom. Fox, a name informing us that Herod is a conniving, deceptive, manipulative person with power, someone of whom to be wary, a person to watch out for. Then Jesus makes a transitional statement, shifting from angry to gentle, saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills prophets and stones those who are sent to it." Jesus is lamenting so much in this statement. He's declaring his great sorrow and grief, not only over the city's current condition and plight, but also over what will happen to it, because it cannot imagine itself in any other way of being. Jesus goes on to say something very gentle and compassionate when he makes this statement: "How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." Jesus as a hen, protecting all of the chicks under her wing as the fire rages through the chicken coop, leaving the hen dead, but fully alive tiny yellow babies under the charred mother's body. Jesus as a hen, standing between the fox who has snuck into the hen house and her own offspring, hoping that in giving herself to be eaten by the fox, A voracious appetite will be satisfied and her children spared. Jesus, longing for the people of Jerusalem to recognize the desperation of their city and the danger in which they are living, and turn to God's original plan of love and justice, mercy and grace, equity and well-being for all. But he knows they will not listen. He knows they will not turn the necessary 180 degrees back to God and God's ways. He knows that their greed, their spiritual, social, and physical desolation will ultimately end life as they know it, as they continue to protect it, blind to the coming ruin. Jesus mourns because he wants to help. He has been doing as much as he could to help Jerusalem, the Pharisees, the villagers in need, and the disciples to accept the truth of his teachings and live a different way. Later on in Luke chapter 19, Jesus will grieve Jerusalem so much that he will weep for where they are and for what will happen to them, because they were and are unreachable, not teachable, entrenched. We live in a world obsessed with status and power, and consequently rife with political plotting. The most obvious in this regard may be the candidates for and holders of governmental office, who often try to make themselves look better than they are and make their opponents look worse than they are at the same time. We also encounter such schemings on a more mundane basis. At work, a colleague slyly tries to take credit for someone else's bold and profitable idea. We call this office politics. In communities of faith, people jockey to influence the outcomes of decisions about who will be the next pastor, or how much mission monies will be apportioned, or what color the carpet will be installed in the fellowship hall. We call these activities church politics. Jesus was not ignorant or innocent of the realities of politics. He was no stranger to political plotting and intrigue. He said things like, "Indeed, when the kingdom of God arrives in its fullness, some are last who will be first, and some are first who will be last." There is nothing that more quickly alarms those on top in comfortable positions than the suggestion that they may not end up on top, but that some of those now relegated to the bottom, to last place, will ultimately be made first. Through his conversation with the Pharisees, as brusque and terse as it is, Jesus lets them know that he is not ignorant of their designs, of their position, of their desire to protect their power. He's fully aware that the realm of God he proclaims and enacts by casting out demons and performing cures, especially among the poor and typically neglected, is an affront to the powers that be, both in Jerusalem and beyond. Jesus is informing the Pharisees that his challenge will go all the way to the top. He will not stop in the provinces, but proceed on his own time to the capital city. Herod will be confronted soon enough. It is as though Jesus is making it clear that the discomforting politics of God's realm will not stop at entering the doors of the state houses in Michigan or Alabama or Texas or Oregon but will also be taken up the line to the steps of Congress and the White House in Washington, D.C. Jesus is well aware that Jerusalem or Washington will placidly welcome him. Jerusalem is a city that kills prophets and murders those sent to it for its own welfare. Yet Jesus, after calling Herod a name, laments. He chooses not to raise the stakes and begin planning a violent revolution, which he could have done. That's how many people were following him around all over Palestine. Herod, the plotting Pharisees, the other power players in Jerusalem, all the first then and now, who will protect to the bitter, desolate, and destructive end their right to see themselves as masters of the universe, invulnerable and imperial, behind their relentless, foxy maneuvering. Jesus calls them death-dealing by name, and yet also sees them as barnyard chicks, facing the fire in the coop, confronting the hungry fox in the henhouse, too afraid and too stubborn to find protection under the wings of their mother hen's love. And the judgment that will yet fall on them if they do not change their ways will be their own self-destruction by their own decisions at their own hands. God's passionate dream and bold determination to gather God's children closer and closer in God's embrace and love is at the center of Jesus' mission and commitment. But it will not be fulfilled in Jesus' day, has not been fulfilled in the centuries since, and cannot be fulfilled as long as Jerusalem, as long as we, the people of the world, refuse to see and believe and act to bring God's dream to fruition. By the way, Fred died in his own home at about 8 a.m. Thursday morning. And Sherry, his hospice nurse, has adopted his beautiful greyhound dog who was scared, left behind, and mourning as well. Let it be so. Amen.